Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take that whole mountain of research you send us, we filter it all down, and we give you just the concentrated knowledge you need to be genuinely informed.
Today we're tackling a figure whose name is, well, it's basically synonymous with catastrophe, Adolf Hitler. The historian Ian Kershaw, he described him as the embodiment of modern political evil.
And that's not an exaggeration. The level of ruination, physical, moral, political, it's just unparalleled.
It really is.
So our mission today for you, the learner, is to go a bit deeper than the usual historical narrative. We're not just going to recount the atrocities. We want to trace the specific, almost improbable path of his life.
How does a failed artist, someone born into relative obscurity, manage to weaponize his own personal failures and political maneuvering to become the absolute central figure in the deadliest conflict in human history?
That's the question. We've got extensive sources here, biographical, historical, detailing everything from his very complicated family tree right up to his final self-inflicted end in that bunker.
And we're going to structure this to really pull out those surprising details, the administrative errors, the key personal relationships, the specific strategic blunders that help explain how a character like this could gain such catastrophic global power.
Okay, let's unpack that journey. And we have to start at the very beginning, right at the foundation. His family life in late 19th century Austria. The instability, it seems, starts with his father, Alois.
Absolutely. Alois Hitler, Adolf's father, he was born illegitimate back in 1837. His mother was Maria Schicklgruber.
So for a huge part of his life, he wasn't even named Hitler.
For nearly 40 years, no. He carried his mother's surname. It wasn't until 1876 that his baptismal record was amended to register a Johann Georg Heidler as his father. And that's when Alois legally took the name.
And the spelling was inconsistent, right? Heidler, Hitler, Hitler. How important is that instability, that sort of late-in-life name change for understanding Adolf's later obsession with purity and, well, racial order?
It's highly symbolic. I mean, we can't draw a direct causal line, but it's there. Alois himself was obsessed with being seen as respectable. He'd climb the ladder, become a successful customs official.
Civil servant.
A civil servant, yes. And the name he chose, Hitler, probably just meant one who lives in a hut. So it's sort of a nod to this very specific rural Austrian identity. But the key thing about Alois was his character. He was severe, quick-tempered, a real dictator in the home.
And that tension, the demanding father and the rebellious son, that seems to be the central conflict of young Adolf's life.
It absolutely is. And speaking of his ancestry, we have to talk about that persistent claim, the one that circulated for years, the Frankenberger thesis.
The idea that Alois's father might have been Jewish, this was politically explosive for the Nazis.
Immensely so. The claim was really pushed by the Nazi lawyer Hans Frank after the war when he was in prison. He claimed that Alois's mother had worked as a cook for a Jewish family called Frankenberger in Graz.
The Nazis themselves were terrified of this rumor. It undermined their entire racial ideology.
Of course. But the sources we have now are just crystal clear on this.
It's been debunked.
Completely. Historians dismiss it outright. There was no Frankenberger family registered in Graz at that time. There's just no credible evidence to back up Frank's story, which, he only told years after the fact.
And for you listening, here is the really definitive modern piece of evidence our sources provide. It settles this with forensic science. A 2025 DNA analysis.
This is a really remarkable historical detail. They performed an analysis on blood samples from the sofa in Hitler's Munich study.
And they confirmed it was his blood.
They did. They verified it against DNA from a known living relative. The sample was authentic. And crucially, that analysis specifically disproved the genetic markers that would have been needed to validate the Frankenberger thesis.
So modern science just shuts the door on a myth that haunted the Third Reich for years.
Firmly, yes.
So back to his childhood. We see this immediate conflict with the Alois. It's funny, given his later German nationalism, that he grows up in Austria.
But he acquires that very distinctive, thick, lower Bavarian dialect that he kept for his whole life. And the conflict at home, it was just relentless. Alois was determined that Adolf would follow him into the civil service.
But Adolf wanted to be an artist.
Desperately. So he chose rebellion. He actually says in Mein Kampf that he intentionally did poorly in school, specifically at the Realschule in Linz.
So it wasn't laziness, it was a strategy.
It was a calculated act of defiance. He figured if he failed at all the traditional subjects, his father would have no choice but to let him go to art school. It was a way of fighting back against this paternal authority he just couldn't stand.
And his father died suddenly in 1903.
He did, which gave Adolf a few years of, let's say, relative freedom. But that pattern was set.
Yeah.
Rebellion against authority figures and this deep, simmering resentment over what he saw as injustice.
Which brings us to 1907. He makes the big move to Vienna. This is where the private man's failure really sets the stage for the political man's rise.
The move was all about pure artistic ambition. But the experience, it was brutal. He was rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna.
Not once.
Twice.
Yeah.
1907 and 1908. And to make it worse, he couldn't even apply to the School of Architecture because he didn't have the high school credentials.
Yeah.
The very credentials he'd thrown away to spite his father.
It's a perfect circle of self-defeat. The sources describe him living this impoverished, almost bohemian life.
Oh, absolutely. He spent years in men's homeless shelters, like the Meldemannstrasse dormitory.
Yeah.
He survived by painting these little watercolors of Vienna's landmarks and selling them to tourists.
Living on the absolute margins of this grand imperial city, it must have been the perfect breeding ground for resentment, for looking for someone to blame.
It was. And the political landscape of Vienna was just feeding into it. Vienna at the time was a crucible of extremism. It was the capital of the multi-ethnic Habsburg monarchy, which Hitler absolutely despised.
He saw it as racially polluted.
Exactly. He thought it favored the Slavic populations over the Germans. He was already a fervent German nationalist, using the Heil greeting, singing the Deutschlandlied instead of the Austrian anthem.
And the political rhetoric was just filled with hate.
It was saturated with it. Populist politicians like the mayor, Karl Lueger, were masters at exploiting anti-Semitic feeling to get votes. Hitler just soaked it all in.
Yeah.
He developed this intense anti-Slavism and an increasingly virulent anti-Semitism.
And then World War I. The frustrated artist finds a new purpose in a uniform.
It's a pivotal moment. Hitler is still an Austrian citizen, volunteers for the Bavarian army in 1914. This was highly irregular.
How is that even allowed?
It was most likely just an administrative mistake. They should have sent him back to Austria to serve there. But he claimed later he refused to serve the Habsburgs because of their, quote, ethnically mixed army.
And he served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front. Incredibly dangerous work.
He was known for being brave, for being committed. He was decorated twice, Iron Cross Second Class, and then the Iron Cross First Class. The sources really stress how rare that First Class award was for his low rank of Gefreiter.
A lance corporal.
Yes. And here's that fascinating, often cited detail. The recommendation for the First Class Medal came from his Jewish superior, Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann.
That one fact, the Jewish officer recommending Hitler for the Iron Cross, it just stands as this bizarre counterpoint to the ideology he was already starting to form.
It's a jarring paradox. But for him, the war was, in his own words, the greatest of all experiences. It gave him a purpose, a sense of camaraderie. Which is why the defeat in November 1918 was such a profound shock.
He was in a hospital, recovering from a gas attack that left him temporarily blind when he heard the news.
And that moment was just formative. Like so many German nationalists, he immediately believed the Dolchstoß legend, the stab-in-the-back myth.
The idea that the army was undefeated but betrayed by politicians at home?
Betrayed by the civilian leaders, the Marxists, and especially in his view, the Jews on the home front. He called them the November criminals.
So you have the shock of defeat combined with the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty. That becomes the perfect political fuel for the rest of his career.
He saw the end of the war not as a military loss, but as a political conspiracy. And that justified, in his mind, an unending struggle for revenge and national restoration.
So we go from the traumatized soldier clinging to this myth to a political operative. In 1919, he's back in the army, but this time as a spy.
That's right. Post-war Munich was just a hotbed of radical politics. Hitler, still technically in the army but with no real prospects, gets this job as an intelligence agent, a Verbindungsmann. His mission was to infiltrate small political groups.
Specifically, the German Workers' Party, the DAP.
Yes, and he didn't just monitor them. He attended a meeting in September 1919, got into a heated argument, and really impressed the party's founder, Anton Drexler.
Yeah, he joined.
On the orders of his military superiors, yes, he became party member 555.
And the sources point out that the party started its numbering at 500 to look bigger than it was.
A fascinating early sign of the propaganda and manipulation that would define the entire movement.
But what was it about him that made him so effective so quickly?
He discovered he had this raw talent for public speaking, for crowd manipulation. His style wasn't intellectual at all. It was rowdy, polemical. He knew how to boil down complex problems into these simple narratives with clear scapegoats.
The November criminals, the communists.
And always, essentially, the Jews. He spoke directly to the resentments of the crowd, the veterans, the lower middle class, who all felt betrayed by this new democratic system.
And he rose through the party ranks incredibly fast. By 1921, he's their star.
He mastered the rally. I mean, in February 1921, he spoke to a crowd of over 6,000 people. He publicized it with trucks full of supporters waving these newly designed swastika flags. He had a charisma that created this almost hypnotic bond with his audiences.
There's that chilling quote from a former Hitler Youth member, Alfons Heck, who said, "We erupted into a frenzy of nationalistic pride that bordered on hysteria. From that moment on, I belonged to Adolf Hitler, body and soul."
And that magnetism led directly to him taking over the party. In June 1921, there was a small mutiny, a threat to merge the party with a rival group. Hitler just angrily resigned.
Oh, power play.
A brilliant one. The leadership knew the party would collapse without him. They capitulated. He rejoined, but only on the condition that he become chairman with absolute power. Dictatorisch Vollmachten.
So he centralizes control right away and formalizes the ideology in the 25-point program.
Which was really a chaotic mix of ideas: ultranationalism, abolishing Versailles, some anti-capitalist themes to attract workers. But for Hitler, the glue holding it all together was the aggressive anti-Semitism. He saw the whole program as a tool, a basis for propaganda.
And the sources are clear that his most destructive ideas were there from the very beginning.
Crucially, yes. We have his earliest known written statement on the Jewish question. It's the 1919 Gemlich letter, which he wrote before he even rose up in the DAP.
And what does it say?
It says, "The final aim of any government must unshakably be the removal of the Jews altogether." The concept of physical elimination was his goal from the moment he stepped into politics.
An intention that leads directly to the 1923 beer hall putsch, his first big attempt to seize power in Munich.
It was a disastrous failure, really. It was modeled directly on Mussolini's March on Rome from the year before. On November 8, 1923, with General Erich Ludendorff at his side for legitimacy, Hitler and his stormtroopers burst into the Bürgerbräukeller,
Interrupting a political meeting.
a meeting of 3,000 people. He fires a pistol into the ceiling and declares the national revolution has begun.
But the local leaders he was trying to coerce, they didn't play along.
Not for long. They quickly withdrew their support. So the next day, when Hitler tried to march on the Bavarian War Ministry, the whole thing fell apart. The police opened fire.
And people were killed.
16 Nazis and 4 police officers died. Hitler fled, dislocated his shoulder in the chaos, and was arrested 2 days later, charged with high treason.
A total political calamity. But the trial itself, that became his greatest stage.
This is a key point. He was charged with high treason, which could have meant the death penalty. But the judges were sympathetic right-wingers. They gave him a platform. He didn't defend himself. He used the courtroom to attack the Weimar Republic and the November criminals.
He turned it into a political rally.
And got national press coverage. He went from being a local troublemaker to a national hero for the radical right.
And his sentence was just 5 years of Festungshaft, which was basically a comfortable form of detention.
He only served just over a year in Landsberg prison. And that year might have been the most productive of his entire career.
Because that's where he dictates Mein Kampf.
My Struggle. He dictates it mostly to his deputy, Rudolf Hess. And it becomes the definitive blueprint for everything that followed.
So let's go deeper into what's actually in that book. What are the core destructive ideas he lays out?
Well, it's a manifesto for total war and racial domination. First, you have the plan for territorial expansion. Lebensraum.
Living space.
Living space in the East. And this wasn't just about borders. It was to be secured through military conquest and what he called ruthless Germanization. That meant the forced removal or extermination of the Slavic people living there.
It's also just a raw expression of his personal hatred.
Oh, profoundly.
Yeah.
He equates Jews with germs, with vermin. He calls them the international poisoners of society.
Yeah.
And it's in Mein Kampf that he explicitly argues the only solution is their extermination.
Ian Kershaw called it a book with an inherent genocidal thrust.
It's the operating manual for the Holocaust, written a decade before he even had the power to enact it.
And the sales figures for the book tell a story all on their own.
They're chilling. Between 1925 and the end of 32, it sold about 228,000 copies. Respectable, but not a bestseller. But the moment he becomes chancellor in January 1933,
It explodes.
1 million copies sold in that year alone. The state started giving it to newlyweds as a wedding gift. What was a radical fantasy written in a prison cell suddenly became the mandatory ideological text of the Third Reich.
So Hitler gets out of Landsberg, he has to rebuild the movement, and for a few years, the economy is more stable, so his message doesn't resonate as much. But then, 1929, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression was the catalyst. It was absolutely indispensable for the Nazi rise to power. The economic collapse just shattered Germany's coalition government. It forced President Hindenburg to start ruling by emergency decree.
So democracy was already failing.
It was already on life support, and that created a political vacuum that the Nazis were perfectly positioned to fill. They capitalized on the mass fear and anxiety. They promised jobs to workers, better prices to farmers, and a return to national pride for veterans.
And their numbers in the Reichstag just skyrocketed.
They went from 12 seats in 1928 to 107 seats in 1930, the second largest party, almost overnight.
But there was a huge administrative problem for him. He wanted to run for president, but he wasn't a German citizen. He was stateless.
This is such a critical detail. He'd renounced his Austrian citizenship back in 1925, but failed to get German citizenship for 7 years. That meant he legally couldn't hold public office or run for president in 32.
So how did he solve this? It seems like a major roadblock.
Through a completely cynical political trick. In February 1932, a Nazi interior minister in the state of Brunswick appointed Hitler as an administrator for Brunswick's delegation to the Reichsrat in Berlin.
And that appointment automatically made him a citizen.
Under the laws of Brunswick, yes. It was a legal loophole, a backdoor maneuver that instantly granted him German citizenship. It was heavily criticized, but it was legal.
And with that secured, he launches his presidential campaign against the incumbent, the war hero Hindenburg. And this is where he really pioneers modern political campaigning.
He was a genuine innovator. He used air travel, flying all over the country under the slogan Hitler über Deutschland, Hitler over Germany.
Which made him look modern, dynamic, while Hindenburg seemed old and stuck in the past.
Exactly. He lost the election, but he got over 35% of the vote. It cemented him as a major political force. And crucially, he started getting serious financial backing from powerful industrialists after a key speech he gave in Dusseldorf.
So he loses the election. How does he end up as chancellor just a few months later?
It comes down to a fatal miscalculation by the conservative elite. Germany was in a state of permanent political gridlock. The former chancellor, Franz von Papen, and other conservatives, they convinced the very reluctant Hindenburg that they could control Hitler.
The idea was to tame him.
To use his popular support to create a stable, right-wing government, but to keep him boxed in by a cabinet of conservatives. It was pure hubris.
And a staggering underestimation of who they were dealing with.
It was their fatal mistake.
Yeah.
When Hindenburg finally caved and appointed Hitler chancellor on January 30th, 1933, Hitler immediately demanded key cabinet posts for his own men.
So he gets the chancellorship, but what else?
He ensures Wilhelm Frick is Reich Minister of the Interior. And perhaps most importantly, Hermann Goering becomes Minister of the Interior for Prussia. That move alone gave the Nazis direct control over the police in 2/3 of Germany right from day one.
And the takeover just accelerates violently from there. A few weeks later, February 1933, the Reichstag building burns down.
The fire was the perfect pretext he needed. The Nazis immediately screamed it was a communist plot. While most modern historians believe the Dutch communist Marius van der Lubbe probably acted alone, it didn't matter. Hitler seized the moment.
And he got Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree. What did that decree actually do?
It was the administrative Trojan horse. It was permissible under the Weimar Constitution's emergency clause, Article 48, but it suspended all basic civil liberties. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, habeas corpus, all gone overnight.
Which allowed him to crush the opposition before the upcoming election.
Instantly. The decree was used to arrest 4,000 members and leaders of the Communist Party, effectively silencing them just days before the crucial March elections.
But even with that repression, the Nazis only got 44% of the vote. Still not a majority. He needed something more to get total power, and that was the Enabling Act.
The Ermächtigungsgesetz, the law to remedy the distress of people in Reich. This was the legislative death blow to German democracy. It gave Hitler's cabinet the power to pass laws without the Reichstag's approval for 4 years.
Even laws that violated the Constitution.
Even those. To pass it, he needed a 2/3 supermajority, and the maneuvering to get it was ruthless.
He used the fire decree to arrest or bar all the communist deputies.
And the vote itself took place at the Kroll Opera House, which was surrounded by massing SA stormtroopers, shouting threats at the deputies as they arrived. Social Democrat leader Otto Welles gave this incredibly brave speech against it, saying, "Liberty and life can be taken from us, but not our honor."
But the vote wasn't even close.
444 to 94. Only the Social Democrats voted against it. And with that single act, passed through a combination of political deals and raw intimidation, the Weimar government became a de facto legal dictatorship.
So with that path cleared, he consolidates power. He outlaws all other political parties, dissolves the trade unions. By July 1933, Germany is a one-party state.
But the biggest remaining threat was internal. It came from his own movement, the huge, unruly paramilitary SA led by Ernst Röhm.
Which leads to the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. Why did he turn so violently on the men who helped him get power?
Because the SA was a revolutionary force, and the revolution was over. Röhm wanted a second revolution. He wanted the SA to absorb and replace the regular German army, the Reichswehr.
Which terrified the military establishment.
And the industrialists, and even Hindenburg. Hitler knew he needed the professional army for his future foreign policy goals. The SA had become a dangerous liability, so he chose the army over his old comrades.
And the purge was brutal.
Between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934, the entire SA leadership was rounded up and murdered, along with a host of other political rivals. This bloody purge actually solidified his image among the elite as a man who could restore order.
And then, just a month later, President Hindenburg dies.
Hitler moves instantly. The office of president is abolished. Its powers are merged with the chancellor's. He takes the new title, Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor. And he makes one more crucial change.
The military oath.
The loyalty oath is immediately changed. Soldiers no longer swore allegiance to the Constitution or the nation. They swore an oath of absolute, unconditional loyalty to Adolf Hitler personally.
Which eliminated the very last legal check on his power. The army was now bound to him, the man.
And by 1938, he solidifies that control through the Blomberg-Frisch affair, forcing out the top two military commanders based on manufactured scandals.
Because they had raised objections to his aggressive war plans.
Exactly. With them gone, he abolishes the war ministry and makes himself commander-in-chief of the armed forces. By 1941, he's personally directing all major military strategy, convinced that only he could lead Germany to victory.
With that absolute domestic power secured, the next step is foreign policy. And the sources are clear, this was never just about getting back the borders Germany lost in 1914.
No, not at all. It was always about massive aggression. Just as he wrote in Mein Kampf, his ultimate goal was conquest for Lebensraum in the East and its ruthless Germanization.
So he starts by immediately tearing up the Treaty of Versailles.
He expands the army, creates an air force, the Luftwaffe, a new navy, the Kriegsmarine. In 1936, he marches troops back into the demilitarized Rhineland.
And the international response is weak?
Condemnation, but no real action. And he interprets this as weakness, as validation that he can keep pushing.
And he gets a huge psychological boost from the Anglo-German Naval Agreement in 1935.
A massive boost. It let Germany build its navy up to 35% of Britain's strength. Hitler called the day it was signed the happiest day of his life. He genuinely thought it was the beginning of the Anglo-German alliance he'd always dreamed of.
Which would free him up to focus on the East.
That was the idea. So he forms the Rome-Berlin Axis with Mussolini, signs the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan, and the pace just accelerates. In 1938, the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria.
And then he immediately turns his attention to the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia.
But the sources make a really crucial point here. His public goal was to liberate the Sudeten Germans. His private intention was a full-scale war of conquest to destroy Czechoslovakia entirely.
So when the European powers meet him in Munich in September 1938, he's actually hoping for a war, not a deal.
He was furious with the Munich Agreement. Even though it gave him everything he publicly demanded, he felt cheated out of his war. He saw the peaceful outcome as a diplomatic defeat.
Despite the fact that the world saw him as this master statesman, which led to him being named Time magazine's Man of the Year for 1938.
A grim irony. By March 1939, he ignores the agreement and takes the rest to Czechoslovakia anyway. Then he turns to Poland.
Poland was the gateway to Lebensraum.
And to secure his eastern flank, he does the unthinkable. He signs the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with his ideological archenemy, the Soviet Union, in August 1939.
Agreeing to carve up Poland between them.
It was pure, cynical, realpolitik. It bought him a free hand to attack Poland and then turn west. But his timeline got complicated when Britain and Poland signed a mutual defense alliance just days later.
So he had to delay the invasion.
From August 25th to September 1st. And on September 1st, the invasion begins. But when Britain and France actually declare war on September 3rd, The sources capture his genuine shock. He turns to his foreign minister, Ribbentrop, and just asks, now what?
It shows this fundamental disconnect between his ideology he really thought Britain wouldn't fight and the reality of the situation.
He'd planned for a limited war against Poland. He got a world war instead.
And after Poland is conquered, we see a perfect example of his chaotic leadership style, what historians call working towards the Führer.
It's all about how Germanization was implemented. Hitler gives these vague ideological orders, Germanize the East, and then he lets his subordinates fight it out to see who can be the most radical.
So you have one Gauleiter, Albert Forster, who just lets Poles sign forms saying they have German blood to boost his numbers.
And then you have another, Arthur Greiser, who aligns with Himmler and carries out brutal ethnic cleansing to preserve so-called racial purity.
And Hitler just lets them compete.
He refuses to intervene. And by doing that, he ensures that the more radical, more violent approach, the Himmler approach, always wins. It's a system designed for constant radicalization.
Which leads directly to the ultimate goal, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941.
The goal was to destroy the USSR, seize its resources, get that Lebensraum, and he hoped finally force Britain to the negotiating table. But this is where his military arrogance really starts to cause irreparable damage.
His early successes made him overconfident.
Dangerously so. He starts to distrust his professional generals. The critical mistake comes in August 1941 on the advance to Moscow. His generals are screaming that they need to take Moscow, the political and transport hub, before winter.
But Hitler overrules them.
He does. He sees economic value in the south, in the Ukraine. He orders the panzer groups to halt their advance on Moscow and divert south to help with the encirclement of Kyiv.
A disastrous decision.
That pause gave the Red Army just enough time to bring up fresh reserves from Siberia and prepare Moscow's defenses. By the time the German offensive on Moscow resumed, the brutal Russian winter had set in. They failed to take the city.
And that strategic inflexibility just gets worse. It culminates at Stalingrad.
Stalingrad is the ultimate example of his disastrous leadership. He refuses again and again to allow the Sixth Army to attempt a breakout when they're encircled. He demands they fight to the last man.
Which leads to their total destruction.
The annihilation of an entire army. Over 200,000 killed, another 235,000 taken prisoner. It was a military and psychological turning point from which Germany never recovered.
And as the military situation gets more desperate, we see the most significant internal resistance. The July 20th plot in 1944.
The attempt by Claus von Stauffenberg to assassinate him with a bomb at the Wolf's Lair. It came astonishingly close to succeeding.
And the sources give that incredible physical detail of how he survived.
Pure luck. Stauffenberg places the briefcase with the bomb near Hitler's feet. But another officer, finding it in his way, just casually moves it to the other side of a massive, heavy oak table leg.
And the table leg deflects the blast.
It deflected the blast up and away from him. It saved his life. And his revenge was swift and total. Over 4,900 people were executed in the purge that followed.
By early 1945, his grip on reality is just gone, which leads to the Scorched Earth Order.
The Nero Decree. On March 19th, he orders the total destruction of all German infrastructure as the Allies advance. And he explicitly says the German people don't deserve to survive because they have proven to be the weaker.
An act of complete political nihilism. He'd rather destroy his own country than let it be captured.
His armaments minister, Albert Speer, secretly disobeyed the order, saving what was left of German industry.
The end finally comes in the bunker in Berlin in April 1945.
On April 22nd, he holds his last military conference. He's told a counterattack he ordered can't happen because the troops don't exist. He flies into a rage, throws everyone out of the room, and for the first time admits everything is lost. He decides to stay in Berlin and commit suicide.
And the final days are just a whirlwind of betrayal and paranoia.
Goering tries to take power and is arrested. Himmler tries to secretly negotiate with the Allies and is declared a traitor. In the midst of this chaos, just after midnight on April 29th, he marries his longtime mistress, Eva Braun.
And then the next day, April 30th.
With Soviet troops just 500 meters from the bunker, they commit suicide together. She bites a cyanide capsule. He shoots himself in the head.
And their bodies were burned.
As per his final instructions, their bodies were carried out into the Chancellery garden, doused with petrol, and set on fire in a bomb crater while Soviet shells rained down.
Which is why there was so much confusion and speculation about his death for decades.
Exactly. No clearly identifiable remains were ever recovered by the Soviets, other than some dental work. It wasn't until 1956 that a West German court, after extensive investigation, officially issued a death certificate.
We have to dedicate proper time to the ultimate crime, the Holocaust. Because in his worldview, the war and the genocide were not two separate things.
They were one and the same. The war in the East was for Lebensraum, and that required the physical removal of the so-called racial enemies who lived there. The war provided the chaos, the cover, and the radicalization needed for systematic mass murder.
And the planning for that murder accelerated when the invasion of the Soviet Union stalled.
Yes. When it became clear the war wouldn't be a quick victory, the plan shifted from expulsion and deportation to outright extermination. The Wannsee Conference in January 1942 was about coordinating the logistics of the final solution.
And the sources point to what is probably the closest thing we have to a direct, explicit order from Hitler.
On December 18, 1941, Himmler's notes from a meeting with Hitler say he asked about the fate of the Soviet Jews. Hitler's response was also partisan and ausrotten. Exterminate them as partisans. That's likely as close as we'll ever get to a smoking gun.
Let's talk about the staggering scope of this genocide. It went so far beyond the Jewish population.
The total number of non-combatants murdered is estimated at 11 million, at a minimum. That includes 6 million Jews, two-thirds of all the Jews in Europe.
But also millions of others.
Millions. An estimated 1.5 million Romani people, 2 million non-Jewish Polish civilians, 3 million Soviet prisoners of war deliberately starved to death, and homosexuals, communists, the disabled through the T4 euthanasia program, anyone deemed an Untermensch and undesirable.
And one of the most chilling aspects is what you could call the dictator's distance. He authorized it, but he never went near the killing centers.
He never spoke publicly about the killings. He never visited a concentration camp. He left the execution entirely to Himmler and Heydrich. It allowed him to maintain this physical and psychological distance from the atrocities being carried out in his name.
This brings us back to his leadership style, the Führer principle.
The leader principle. It demanded absolute obedience. Government was a pyramid with him as the infallible peak. He didn't hold cabinet meetings after 1938. He ruled by issuing these broad, vague commands, often verbally.
And he actively fostered chaos among his subordinates.
It was a deliberate strategy. He'd give contradictory orders, create overlapping responsibilities. He believed this competition would ensure that the stronger one would get the job done. It maximized his own power by making sure no single subordinate could become a rival.
Let's turn finally to his personal life and health. The public image was one of austerity, of self-control.
That image was very carefully cultivated. He was a non-smoker. He became a vegetarian. He would even describe animal slaughter in graphic detail at dinner parties to put his guests off their meat.
But this image of control was a complete contradiction to his extensive and debilitating drug use during the war.
His health fell apart. He had chronic stomach problems and later a visible tremor that was likely Parkinson's disease. And his personal doctor, Theodor Morell, was prescribing him a terrifying cocktail of drugs.
Up to 90 different medications a day.
90 a day in the final years. Opiates, cocaine eye drops. But most critically, he became addicted to amphetamines Pervitin, starting in late 1942.
And historians directly link that amphetamine addiction to his increasingly erratic and inflexible military decisions, like at Stalingrad.
Amphetamines can induce paranoia, hyperfocus, and extreme stubbornness, all traits he displayed in spades. His drug dependency almost guaranteed his strategic decisions would be rigid and totally disconnected from reality.
And we can close that loop with that final cutting-edge detail from the DNA analysis.
Right. The 2025 analysis of the blood from his sofa. It confirmed his identity, but it also found a deletion in the PROK2 gene. Researchers have suggested this could be linked to Carmen syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that can prevent a person from fully completing puberty. It's just a strange, speculative biological footnote to a life of such immense destruction.
So if we synthesize this whole deep dive, the story of Adolf Hitler is really one of unparalleled ambition that wasn't built on any kind of merit. It was built on resentment, on manipulated failure, and a destructive ideology that, when it found the catalyst of an economic crisis, just consumed an entire nation.
His legacy is ruination. Full stop. Kershaw said that never in history has such physical and moral ruination been associated with the name of one man. Germany was reduced to stunned and null. 0 hour. The human cost is just. It's almost impossible to comprehend. Nearly 20 million civilians and PLUs killed through deliberate policy, on top of the almost 29 million soldiers and civilians who died in the war in Europe.
And historians also point to these massive, unintended global consequences of his actions.
Absolutely. The Holocaust and the displacement of Europe's surviving Jewish population. is directly linked to the creation of the modern state of Israel. And many argue the sheer cost of the war is what broke the back of the European colonial empires, which massively accelerated decolonization across the world.
In a perverse, catastrophic way, his destruction helped forge the post-war world order.
It did, and his death was described by those who were there as a spell being broken. The entire Nazi system, which was built around this cult of personality, just burst like a bubble the moment he was gone.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. Something to take away from all this. Hitler built his entire regime on the Führerprinzip, the idea of an infallible, absolute, ultimate leader. We've seen his erratic decline, his refusal to retreat at Stalingrad, his final order to destroy Germany itself. So what critical lesson does that final self-defeating act teach us about the intrinsic fragility, the ultimate self-destruction that is baked into any system of totalitarian, centralized power?
The system that cannot admit it's wrong is the system that is designed for total, self-imposed collapse.
Something profound to think about. That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.